Welcome to Treysta in Conversation With. Listen in as one of our team is joined by a member of our community to chat about their professional, personal and financial life, including a key money moment. Here's today's episode.
Hello everybody, welcome to In Conversation With, where today I am thoroughly pleased to be joined by Dr. Shane Clifton. Shane, welcome.
Good to be with you, Adam.
Thank you for taking time to do this on such a gloriously sunny day while you are by the coast as well. I'm sure you'd be like to get out there sooner or later.
Well, I don't get sunburnt this way, so...
I certainly would, so I understand that. I'm really looking forward to doing this podcast for a while, and one of the biggest reasons for that is there's so many avenues I think I could talk to you about or things we could cover. So I've no doubt we're going to have no shortage of topics to discuss today. And for me, you have such a fascinating journey personally and career-wise, so many different areas that you have touched along the way. So I want to try and take the listeners through various elements of that. And obviously, I think there's so much learning that can come from the way that you've approached various things over the years that I've known you. So I originally thought sometimes it's best to start at the beginning and work your way forward, but I actually think today I might start now and work backwards a little bit, because the work that you currently do is actually a reasonable example of what things mean to you in life and what you're interested in. So, and by that I'm referring to the NDIS work and the Royal Commission. So I thought maybe let's start there and you can explain what you're doing at the moment, and then we might touch on a few things prior to that that you've done, either whether it's your lecturing work or the speaking work that you do, and how the work and the personal life intertwine and the drivers behind that. So yeah, it might be a good way to kick off and just let us know what you're working on at the moment from that regard.
Yes, look, as you say, I work at the Royal Commission into violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation of people with disability. So I've been there over 3 years now, since 2019. The Royal Commission has about another year, a bit less than that, left of its life. But I've done a couple of roles there. My background was as an academic, so the first couple of years I was in research, and the last year I've been writing in the policy branch. Really, I'm maybe a bit of a writer, academic by profession, so writing for the final report. Right now I'm writing on respect and inclusion of people with disability in mainstream society, addressing negative attitudes to people with disability. Negative attitudes are interesting because they're not everyone likes people with disability, so it's not that people are generally, against people with disability, but they tend to hold assumptions and presumptions and have low expectations about what people with disability are capable of. So, and as a consequence, people with disability are often excluded from so much of mainstream society. So, yeah, that's what I'm working on.
And probably a bit of subconscious behaviour from some people as well around those areas that you've mentioned. I know as you've been going through this work on the Royal Commission, I think one of the conversations we had was it's all well and good having a Royal Commission, but it has to be implemented post that, or the recommendations have to be implemented and people have to embrace it in the right way for it to have the right effect. And of course, I have an experience of this being in an industry that has had a Royal Commission. So I've seen how it's handed down, how it's kind of enacted, who embraces that kind of thing. So given you're right in the middle of this, is it your sense at the moment that it's achieving what it needs to achieve, and are you confident of the outcomes?
Oh, geez, this is a really interesting conversation, and maybe I should be asking you how you think the finance industry is responding to its Royal Commissions. But I guess that two things to note. I should say, actually, make it pretty clear to anyone listening, I'm not a Royal Commissioner and have to be actually very careful that I don't speak for the Royal Commission. It's the Commissioner's report and their work. And I guess it's a little early for us to be able to say, is this going to be implemented? But what I can say is that it's pretty clear that the stories that the Royal Commission has been able to unfold are pretty horrifying. There really has been some horrific treatment of people with disability, and it's not just one-on-one. interactions, although there is some of that. It's also systemic. It's the way in which systems and organisations just systematically exclude, restrict in really oppressive ways. So it's the way in which power is exercised. And you can already see in public that there's been responses to some of what the Commission is talking about. So I think working there, we're hopeful that change will be wrought, but we're also aware that, because you're dealing with such entrenched ideas and systems that have been in place for forever, change in areas like this don't occur overnight. So when you're dealing with these sort of recommendations, you need to take, there'll be some changes which you can implement and they can fix immediately, and hopefully that will happen. There'll be others that are going to take longer, because this is about how, this isn't just sort of about how an industry or a group of people are responding. This is about how the whole society is shaped, and the way in which we all think about disability. And we tend to think of disability as sort of this, marginal topic about a few people on the side. But of course, the truth is that disability is about really what it is to be human. We're all born dependent. Old age is the process of becoming disabled to a certain extent. At every point in life, you're at risk of disability or sickness. You almost certainly know people who are disabled. So really, I think if society starts to think about this not just as a sort of a marginal topic on the side, but as about what sort of society do we want to live in, then I really hope that the sort of changes that the Royal Commission makes, we think about seriously, and over time change toward that. But I'm realistic to know that, hey, we live in a pretty shitty world in many ways, a beautiful and a terrible world, and change is difficult and slow. So pessimistically optimistic, is that, can I say that?
It's a fair reflection. It's like to your point there, it's not about changing rules, it's about behaviour and approach. And one of the words that I've picked up in that, which I think is really relevant, is inclusion, because it's not enough to look at particular narrow areas like disability as in isolation. It's about inclusion of people. And like you said, someone can have their own perception of what disability may be, but there's lots of other people out there who think something different. So it is about inclusion, but also, to your point, you're not changing rules, you've got to change behaviours, attitudes, education. And I think over time, like you've mentioned, it may be that you're trying to achieve certain things through behavioural change, but along the way, people realise there's a different way to do it, and continue to tweak it. And of course, it's generational. So it's all very well trying to change the minds of now, but you've got to then help the people now change the minds or educate those coming through in the next generation. So it's a fascinating thing to be a part of, no doubt.
I'm in a Royal Commission, but anyone listening in business, or how do you change an organisation? And there is so many different dimensions to it, because of course it's not as though legal change is unimportant, and sometimes you need attitudinal change, but sometimes you've got to change behaviour, and that changes attitudes. So I think there's a real circularity. It's not one thing or another, but let's try and take little steps in all of these areas, and they start to, I hope, build momentum toward a tipping point to change. And we have seen some pretty remarkable social changes. I'm older than you, 52, and over the course of my life, because inclusion is about, how many women do we have in our leadership positions in the businesses that we're a part of? And we've seen fundamental changes in that over the course of my lifetime. It's about, the way in which we embrace and welcome LGBTQI people, for example. And again, we have seen some pretty remarkable changes. So that does give reason to hope and be optimistic. And yeah, the whole process for how you change cultures and organisations is a real fascinating one, and I'm learning so much about the process now, so it's quite exciting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Generationally, I've noticed over the last few years, particularly my generation, I can sense there is more openness to some of those things you've talked about, whether it's gender equality, or whether, I live in a part of Sydney that's very open-minded towards DQI and that kind of thing. So I have got a sense of it, and I do think it's improving, but by no means is it appropriate for me to say it's at the right level yet. So it is interesting to watch unfold. I know that your background is academic to a certain extent, and you're not a person that does roles for money or anything like that. It's purpose and it's morality and it's how you can impact things and influence them and where that comes from. Can you just talk us through how you got involved in this in the first place and where that came from for you?
It is, and my brother are accountants, and so I started with Price Waterhouse back years and years ago, and I was a more conservative Christian then than I am now, and so I moved from that actually into theology and ethics. So I moved from accounting to a theological college and ended up getting a PhD at Australian Catholic University in theology. And so I was teaching theology and ethics at a theological college, and then in 2010 I had a spinal cord injury. So it was 2 weeks before my 40th birthday, and life can certainly change in an instant. I was on the south coast with my children at a youth facility that had been set up by a local church, and they'd created a jump into a foam pit. The things they have in the gymnasium that is meant to keep you safe. It turns out this was badly built, but left the impression it was safe, at least on my mind. So I was a parent who parented by play, and so my kids I was a surfer and skateboarder, and so my kids did this. So I jumped on a push bike and took a jump, landed upside down, and broke my neck, my fourth and fifth vertebrae here, and knew immediately I was in serious trouble. There's a video of this if you're feeling macabre online. I think I've shown it to you before, have I, Adam?
Yeah.
So yeah, I spent flown by helicopter to Prince of Wales Hospital, spent 7 months in Prince of Wales, and I guess the next 10, 12 years learning how to live with disability. And I don't know the extent to which you want to go into that, but I just in summary, I can say on the one hand, it's been the most difficult and horrible and challenging journey, and on the other hand, it's been a surprisingly rich and fascinating and moments of joyous journey. So very strange things that come out of crisis and loss. So really that then steered me toward disability studies. I was connected with the University of Sydney and ended up in 2018 in crisis with my work. Quit my work to do with LGBT inclusion, which we were talking about before. I was pro-LGBT in conservative spaces, and that created clash. So ended up unemployed for 9 months and then worked at a Royal Commission. So there you go. That's the 2-minute summary of my career, and you can bounce out of whichever one of those interests you.
Well, look, my first thing is to say thank you for being so open and sharing such a deeply personal story, because part of the reason we do this podcast is for people to share stories and allow others to listen and be inspired by them. And I think I struggle to think of many more inspiring stories than yours in the way you've gone through the years subsequent to that, the different things you've done and the way you've embraced things, the various paths that you've taken and sharing your journey, I think really is helpful for others. You do speaking work. I know that you've done speaking work as well to do this, to kind of share the story a little bit as well. Is that something that you've done because you want other people to learn from it, or something that you find helpful for yourself, a bit of both?
Look, I was a lecturer, so I'm used to public speaking, and of all of the different things in which I've done over the course of my life, actually teaching was probably the one that was the most fulfilling, because you get some time with students and are able to open up their horizons. Speaking is not something I am pursuing at all, but I get asked constantly. So, I'm speaking at a happiness conference in a month. I've got another I'm speaking at a rehabilitation conference in 2 weeks. A week ago, I spoke at a evolving faith conference online in the US. So my biggest problem with speaking is that I actually have no time. I'm really time poor. And I used to have this rule in life, actually, which is just say yes. Life can take you in strange directions. Take the opportunities that are there. But I'm having to learn to say no because I don't have time and, don't feel like I do things justice. So I'm not pursuing speaking for any other reason than people ask me, and I'm generally comfortable sharing and talking.
Yeah, there's a great book by an American psychologist, Brené Brown, called Daring to Be Great, which I often tell people that's one of the best books I've ever read, and it's just about going for everything, putting yourself out. If somebody offers it, just say yes, try it, and it's all very well if you've got all the time in the world, but there's got to be a point where it creates too many challenges. And so another thing I want to pick up on that you just mentioned there is happiness, and you mentioned that's one of the things that you would talk about. Obviously, you went on a heck of a journey through challenge, difficulty, and finding happiness, or working your way through that. And I know at the start of when I first met you, one of the first things that we worked on was moving house and going to a happy place for you, which is Bad Beach. And that was something that previously you loved, early in life, like you said, surfed and did all those things. And obviously, because of what happened in terms of your accident, probably threw some real challenges around going to the beach again. So can you talk us through what happiness means, or the journey that you found along the way, and how you either discovered it more, found out what truly was happiness to you rather than what you potentially thought it was before?
Yeah. I mean, to some degree, in one way or another, I've spent the last 12 years thinking about happiness and trying to be happy. So, for obvious reasons, spinal cord injury involves a lot of loss. It's physical loss. It's so I basically, I've got some movement, but basically very little movement or sensation from the sort of upper chest down, and so it has an impact on the sports that you can enjoy and do. It has an impact on sexual function, has an impact on relationships, the mutual self-giving between partners in a marriage. As parenting, as I said, I was parenting by play, and so I found it difficult in those early years. I had 3 teenage children to be a parent, and so for the first 3, 4, 5 years, I really struggled with that, just a desperate unhappiness. And that, of course, got me thinking about happiness and what it means. I spent some time reading the virtue tradition, which, if you're not familiar with it, it has its origins in Aristotle. Greek philosophy gets taken up in some Christian ethical conditions. Right now, it's become the sort of new vogue in psychological circles. Topic, you might have heard of positive psychology or some of these. But the basic idea is that happiness is not something that you get in the immediate. It's best not defined by the immediate up and down emotions, because they come and go depending on circumstances. But it's something achieved over the long run for a life lived for meaning and purpose. And you do that by exercising virtues. Vices destroy your ability to achieve this long-term success, and virtue, self-control, patience, kindness, they're the sort of character traits that you need to sort of practice so they become part of who you are. So that's the basic tradition. There's a lot of problems and issues with the tradition, which I won't go into now, but I guess the thing that is interesting in my life is, over time, I still deal with permanent pain and all those losses, but over time I've found happiness in all sorts of ways. What's really intriguing to me is the extent to which actually crisis and difficulty is often the place that elicits the more deeper forms of meaning and purpose. So, is the happy life one that just parties on the weekend, or is the happy life one that discovers that in the middle of crisis, people are really kind and generous and help you out, and they'll walk with you on journeys and spend time talking through with things, and hey, how amazing your family and friends are in those times, and so you sort of, it's when life is often at its deepest when you're struggling through challenges together with others. And then being introduced to the world of disability, I met so many amazing people, discovered just this rich, diverse, crazy world that I didn't know before, and obviously that's ended up as a career for me. So it's to try and live meaningfully and purposefully, and then more recently challenging that virtue tradition with its lack of concern about emotion and joy, and because I think we also need to find ways to party and have fun, and for me that has maybe been more of a challenge. How do I find ways that I can find that immediate pleasure? And that brings us back, I guess, to, you mentioned the beach. So as you said, one of the losses that I'd had was surfing. It was probably my great passion, and so for a long while there I couldn't stand looking at the beach. All I could see when I was looking at the surf was what I'd lost. And so there just came a point in time where my brain was able to switch and just notice the beauty of the beach, and so I was able to appreciate it for different reasons. And this idea of being able to savor experience awe and joy in the beautiful, I think became more significant for me. So I find that in the beach, in good quality whiskey, trying not to drink too much of it, but I'm not always very good at that.
Really interesting couple of points you've raised as you've gone through the journey there. And as you go along, you learn what happiness means in your own world to different levels at different stages of life, and you never stop learning that, and it never stops changing, I don't think. And it doesn't matter if you said you're obviously a bit older than me, so you'll be further down that journey. I've learned over the years happiness means different things to me as I go along, and the point of adversity is a really interesting one. Actually, I watched the program last night, and this is quite a brutal line I'm about to say, but the lady said on there, you need to understand death before you understand the value of life. And as blunt and brutal as that is, there is something in that. And to your point, and I'm not going to be ignorant and suggest that I understand what you've been through, but when you have challenges, you really start to understand what's important, what makes you happy, and try and give yourself the opportunity to do that. And it is different for everyone, but it's a really fascinating way that you've talked through that. So thank you for being open about that. I think the other part is that I'm interested in is decision making along the way. So as you've learned that, the decisions you've made, so you referred to obviously the beach, and when we talked about moving to the beach, that was kind of a point where you started to go beyond that challenge of not being near there. And I know you embrace these things and get in the water and go to the snow and kind of have a crack at all those things and enjoy them. I hope you don't mind me sharing another recent decision that you've made to get a place in the city so that access and coming into the city is more enjoyable for you, and that again will hopefully help in happiness in terms of doing things that you can be close to, whether it's the work that you do or just having a more functional element of life. Well, moving forward, will you continue in the spaces that you're in, or is it your ideal that you will continue to try and develop and work in new angles or new areas of what we've talked about in happiness and learn new things? I know that you're not minded to stay in the same lane necessarily.
Oh, look, I'm in this weird position actually where I'm really just trying not to think too much past the Royal Commission, although it's coming up really quickly to an end. It's one of these weird things where I feel like at the moment just the strange circuitous path of life has put me in the middle of something that's really significant, that for this time I'm committed to finishing. So I actually am not thinking too much about the future, but certainly in terms of those past decisions and the buying the house, and they're difficult decisions, and at the time huge amounts of money, the fears that you're overspending. And look, I've had that same fear again now. It's been really helpful having doing this journey with you, because you keep reminding me, no, you can afford to do this, Shane. Don't stress too much about it. So I don't always think I'm the best decision maker at these things. I think often I stress way too much about them. But yeah, look, I'm trying to make certainly financial decisions based on what will enable us to live a rich and ethical life at the same time. Sometimes those are contradictory, and I'm sure we don't do it perfectly, but that's what we're trying to do.
There's an intersection between money and happiness, and people take that intersection in different ways. And like you said, whether it's more of a virtue kind of path or others take a different way. So it is different to everyone, but it is interesting helping people understand how you navigate that relative to your own life, and particularly with the things that I've worked on with you, it's been really rewarding watching those changes, because I know how much it means to you. Another thing I just wanted to touch on that you mentioned earlier, and this is about family. I know family is important to you, and I'm fortunate enough to know quite a few members of your family. And you also wrote a book, and often during this podcast, I will talk to people about books they've read and they're interested in, but seldom do I get to speak to somebody who wrote a book. So, and maybe more than one, I think, potentially. But can you just talk us through the book a little bit, how that came about? Obviously, we know probably the journey behind it, but what the process was like for you to do that, and what you were aiming to allow other people to understand your journey and happiness and so on?
Yeah, look, I'm an academic background, so I've written a lot, and I guess I've written two books that are relevant to this. And probably the main one is really my memoir. So it's called Husbands Should Not Break. I published in 2015, I think. So, but really written sort of in the first 3 or 4 years after the injury. It's sort of intriguing going back to it now, because I feel like I've actually progressed quite a bit since I finished that. But nevertheless, I wrote that for myself. It was one way in which you process life, I think, is to write about it. There's this idea that I think is actually significant whether you're a writer or not, but it's the idea that life, the meaningful life, is a storied life. What's the story that you find yourself a part of, and what choices are you making? What's happening to you that you can't control? What options have you got to try and steer that life in a particular way? And when crisis occurs, what's that done to the narrative, and how can you rewrite your own narrative in a way that helps you get back up off the ground? And so I guess for me, writing Husbands Should Not Break was, and that just came from something a piece of artwork my wife, Ellie, did for me at the time. So it was a process of thinking through loss, and I ended up publishing it. It's been quite well received. People seem to enjoy it. It gives an insight, I think, into the weird world of spinal cord injury. Bodies are strange, and spinal cord injury is interesting. But hopefully, I think its relevance is more than just spinal cord injury. It's about finding happiness and meaning in the context of the losses that we all face in life, whether that's spinal cord injury or the loss of a spouse or your own sickness or just aging.
The kind of point raised there, and we often talk about a life well lived, and what is a life well lived? It's different to everyone, and there's some great research done around the dying or those in kind of their later days, and conversations had with them about what they wish they would have done differently in life, or the things they wish they'd achieved in life. I think it's a really interesting way of looking at things, because when life is so busy and fast and we've got so much going on, it's quite rare to take the time out to think, if I was in 30 years' time and looking back at my life, what would I have liked to have achieved, or what do I think would have been great about a life well lived? Have your journey, and more so how aware you are of happiness and kind of a spiritual approach to it almost, do you think that way, and have you thought that way in terms of, I've had a heck of a story so far, but in 20 years time or 30 years time, and I'm looking back, like, are there other things that I would hope to have achieved, or other things I would like to do, so that I can say, it's a life well lived and it has been what I want it to be?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think you mentioned much earlier the comment that you've got to know the reality of death before you can live well. I certainly think that's true, and so I think weirdly I'm at the point now. Of course, I vacillate in how much I think you should look back and live. I'm actually at a point where I've done enough thinking about life and meaning and its purposes, and I'm actually it's actually just simplified for me in recent times, because I think you can be too driven sometimes for your purpose and not living enough in the present. So I think there's real balances there. So for me, I really just want to simplify it to a couple of things. So I'd like to, there's so many causes in the world, there's so many purposes that you can have, and Facebook and social media forces us into these virtue signaling cycles where we want to make ourselves look good by getting behind every cause and living for all these purposes. And so for me, actually, it's just, it's much simpler nowadays. I think it is just, I want to do the work, do work that I think is meaningful, and so try and develop my expertise so I can make a meaningful contribution in my workplace. I want to work and live with people I like, so that we can enjoy the process together. I think there's a lot of evidence about work that actually it matters less what you're doing and more who you're doing it with. So I think it's a combination of both, but I think that's really significant. So I'd like to be working and developing friendships and family life, and then just actually having as much fun as I can. And I think too much focus on purpose can sometimes take away from that. So it's as simple as that for me. And so when I get to the end of my life, I hope I can simply say, I made some small contributions to this world. And I think, most of us just make some tiny contributions, really. So I made some small contributions to this world. I didn't cause too much damage. I think harm mitigation is really significant. And I think that's for us as individuals, but more so for a society. Human species are becoming a plague, and we've got some really serious social issues that we need to address to reduce the harm that we're causing on the environment. And I think whenever we're engaging in business, I think that really should be the forefront for so much of our thinking, because business has such consequences on the environment. So yeah, I just want to be able to get to the end and say, I've had good friends, I've done a little bit of good in work, I've not caused too much damage, and I've had some fun along the way.
The presence discussion is a really interesting one, and I think it's something that came to the fore, particularly through COVID. There's another client that I work with who is a master of this, and spends a lot of his time talking about it and writing about it and practicing it. And I know certainly during COVID, where we were all at that stage where we couldn't really think forward in a lot of ways, and the future was really unclear. We were all at home almost, or mastering things like enjoying small wins in the present, because that's all you could do at the time, became fundamental. And so you're right. I think there's a balance there always of, you have to have one eye on the future, but if you do that too often, there's a great picture that we often have, which is somebody chasing their dream off continually, and when they actually catch it, they fall off a cliff and it's too late. And then there's a really good kind of story to take out of that, I think, about enjoying it now and being aware of it and being present in it as well. So it's a really great point you raised.
Yeah, it's interestingly, I think sometimes we do divide up in ways that are artificial, this living for the future, pursuing a future dream, so sacrificing the present. But the best dreams are the ones, like there's this an old Christian notion of hope. Hope sees the future, so it looks to the future. But it brings that future into the present, because hope is a present emotion. And so you're only really living meaningfully for the future when you're living in the present. So you're acting in the present, you're enjoying the process of getting there, because if you don't, whatever that future turns out to be will end up being corrupt anyway.
On the topic, I suppose, of things that we do now, things that we do in the future, you've talked about lots of challenges that you've kind of faced so far, and probably some rewarding elements of it as well. Are there any kind of key decisions, big decisions that you came across that you think back and think, wow, I'm glad I did that a certain way, or I wish I'd have done something differently, just from either a learning perspective yourself, or just to allow others to understand that they're not the only people who face these big decisions?
Yeah, I mean, look, don't you wish you had your 50-year-old mind and your 20-year-old body?
I believe the term's old head on young shoulders, but it very rarely occurs.
Yeah. Look, I think I've just been fortunate with a lot of my decision making, that I've had good advice and good friends along the way, and that's helped me to make wise decisions. So I don't think I'm necessarily a very good decision maker, but I've got people I can talk to when I make decisions, and my brothers and my family are really close, and so we talk all of the time. And Kurt connected me with you, so when I go through big decisions, we'll have a talk. And so I think in terms of the process of decision making, I think I've mostly been fortunate. And so in terms of those big decisions, I mean, hey, if I could turn back time, should I have taken that jump that broke my neck? Well, you know what's weird? If I hadn't have done that, my life would be so different in so many ways. And look, I would love to be able to enjoy better sex and be able to go for a surf and play with my kids. And so in many ways, of course, I'd go back in time if I could. But on the other hand, I probably wouldn't be living where I am, and I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing, and I wouldn't have met, my close friends who are blind and deaf. And so life is rich as a consequence, and you wouldn't go back on any of those decisions.
It would have changed. You wouldn't be true to yourself, because the playful kind of creative person that you were and enjoying life, and you would have wanted to do that anyway and gone for it. So yeah, it's I don't never think looking back is a positive thing necessarily, which is interesting to hear your take on that. We often talk where we can on this about where people consume their information, whether it's great books or great movies or kind of documentaries, whatever it may be, and lots of us do that. I think in your case, being an academic, and you probably have even more scope to talk on this. So, are there any particular books or any particular people that you follow or material that you consume that you think is really helpful in the spaces that you've talked about, to allow others to learn and go through journeys that you've talked about as well?
Yeah, it's interesting because my formal reading is going to bore everyone, because essentially I live and work around my expertise. Having said that, I would say to people that disability is such a rich field. If you've never entered it, you actually might be surprised by how much you might learn and enjoy. So, I'm just thinking of the work of Tom Shakespeare, who's a short-statured person who's had a spinal cord injury, for example, disability rights and wrongs. So if you're interested in disability work, you might read something like that. But outside of my discipline, I'm an avid reader, but I read no self-help, or it's for me, I'm interested in science fiction and novels, and so and again, maybe this is because I'm interested in the absurdity of life. So Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, or Ursula Le Guin's Left Hand of Darkness. I think science fiction actually can be really good about exploring life and its meanings, because it can play with a setting. So Ursula Le Guin is a feminist sci-fi writer who plays with gender in her characters in really intriguing ways and puts them in settings that are fun. So that's the sort of thing I read. Novels and movies. I mean, you know, there is some really great movies to explore meaning. Things like Magnolia, but I'm really a Tarantino fan. So I don't know what's meaningful about Tarantino, but he's just such a good filmmaker. Django Unchained, so none of that's helpful for your readers for suggestions about self-help, because it's just not really what I do.
Yeah, I'll probably just challenge that thought a little bit, and it's a great way to finish up potentially. But in what you've talked about so far, you've often talked about having the ability to be creative and playful and not take things too seriously and enjoy that exploratory kind of way of thinking, and that's how you always were. And the books you suggested and read are quite closely aligned with that, and it's that ability to have a bit of fun with it and think of things that are outside the normal and consume that. So even though I wasn't asking for self-help things, I was actually more asking because people listen to this and they understand the things you've talked about, then what you read as part of that is a really interesting way of thinking through it and allowing yourself to take yourself off into that other space of creative worlds and not necessarily in ours. So it's a really great way of putting it. I thank you for that.
Let me give you one more, just because I'm feeling completely out there. I've got a trans daughter at the moment, and so we've just been watching Heartbreak High, which is an Australian teenage film which explores really diversity in the school ground. It's really out there.
Is this the remake?
Sorry?
Done, the new version?
Yeah, it's a remake and much more risque and out there, so it's not going to be everyone's viewing. And it's teen. It's in a sense, it's a teen television series, but it's exploring, diversity, the strange choices we make, and just getting us thinking about even sexual joy and sexual choices and sexual ethics. So, so many good things.
I had seen it mentioned a few times in articles that I had read recently, so I'll put it on the list and be open-minded. It's a great place to kind of wind up, I think. I just want to thank you so much, Shane, for being so open about everything. I think your story is really fascinating. I've no doubt when we release this podcast, we'll get lots of people that reach out and probably thank you for sharing it. And likewise, if anyone has any questions or wants to get in touch, hopefully I can put them your way. But once again, just thank you for sharing your story. It's been fascinating and an absolute pleasure as always.
My pleasure as well. Good to talk to you, Adam.
Thanks, Shane. You have a good day.